Good afternoon, everyone. I think we will get started. Here we are again, third week in a row for our Advising and Career Services Community Forum, aptly titled Navigating Uncertainty in the Fall of 2020. I'm Ren Singer. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Advising and Career Services, and it's great to be here with you today. We have two parts to our meeting today. The first part, we are very glad to have Jeff Novak here, who is the Director of University Housing. I can't imagine how he is doing these days. Maybe he'll tell us. He's going to give us some information, then we'll have time for questions. And then the second half of our conversation will be more focused for the academic advising community, but career services community, you're welcome to stay, focused on the planning and implementation of the spring 2021 enrollment period, which is quickly coming. So that's what we've got planned today. And Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick announcement.
Thanks, Ren. So everyone, I'm taking attendance at these sessions, and it really helps me out if your name matches what you have in OHRD. If you could change your name for me, that would really help out. You can do that by going to participants. You'll see that towards the bottom of your screen, and then hover over your name. You should see a blue box that says more. If you click on that, you should see the option to rename yourself. If you don't see the option to rename yourself, that's okay. If you can use the chat to let me know who you are, I appreciate it. And I will be reaching out to you if I don't hear from you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. So Jeff, we're going to turn it over to you for some comments, and then afterward, our team will facilitate question and answer for you, so you don't have to worry about watching the chat or calling on people. We have people here that will do that for you. So Jeff Novak, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Ren. Thanks to everyone for the invitation, and certainly the last week has been a wild one, not just for us, but everybody. First, I know on the first screen that I see, and I tried to scroll through all the names that are here, I see some friends and colleagues and some that I haven't met, but thanks to everybody for your support of housing. We certainly know that those things that are occurring here in housing fall on your ears a lot as well, and concerns come to you and questions. So thank you for all of your support. Yeah, yesterday was a great day, ending the Celery and Whitty quarantine. Hopefully everybody had heard about that by now. That ended yesterday at 8 a.m. I can come back to that. Just some overall highlights. We started the year at 86% occupancy. Last year we opened with 8,100. Jocelyn could probably quote all of these stats better than I could, but 8,100 on campus, and we opened this year right around 6,700. As we've moved along into the semester, this morning's report, we're right around 6,000. So we are seeing students cancel. The good news for the greater campus is that those students are canceling but still staying enrolled here. So just choosing to, for some, move off campus, some return home. A great many of those that did cancel to start us with that opening number are enrolled, as we see the freshman class generally coming in right where we had hoped this year. So the housing wasn't indicative in terms of affecting the enrollment. So we're right under 80% occupancy right now. Incoming, we had a testing program for all students that came, were required to move in and test, and we saw about a 0.7% average. If this is too much, somebody put in a wave. 0.7% average on testing. So about 7 a day out of the 1,000 that we tested during move-in. After that first week, we saw about a 3% return rate, so going up to 20-ish a day, and then certainly after that big week, we saw that spike in Celery and Whitty, particularly of upwards of a 20% positivity rate during our biweekly testing. We do have a biweekly testing Biweekly, according to the medical, would mean, medical professionals have taught me, that's twice a week. It's an every other week testing program that we've been doing. We have split roommate pairs up to get better accuracy there, but every other week testing for each of our students and staff that are with us in housing, and did see that spike that caused us to have a great discussion with executive leadership and our UHS partners and put that quarantine in place for Whitty and Celery. We had been preparing for potential quarantines, maybe a floor, never 2,300 students. So it certainly came upon us fast, especially with that big spike in one day. We didn't really see an indication that it was going to be that large, or hopefully we would have had a little bit more preparation time. And so that quarantine order went into effect, really gave students a couple hours notice to get their belongings in order and to have that put into place. We tried, and I shared with my ASM shared governance group this morning, to deliver meals the first day to students, and quickly learned to try to get 2,300 people meals in an hour's time is just not doable. And certainly we owned that. We tried our best. It was interesting. I shared with them, we typically get 100 or 200 students to dine with us at Gordon for breakfast each morning, but still prepared 1,500 breakfast orders and got complaints of what we provided from more than would have ever dined with us. So though they didn't dine with us, they complained about the free offering, which we thought was still pretty good. And lunch we managed, but eventually the course for that to make it more effective and better for the students. Gordon Dining and Event Center, our largest dining hall, does 75% of those that dine there are from Whitty and Celery. So it was an easy kind of switch for us to take the few other halls that use that facility and ask that they go to somewhere else, and then allow the Whitty and Celery students to go over to to Gordon. It gave them some outside time, which they were desperately wanting as well, and worked. So we while in quarantine, had a second round of testing that went down to just under a 10% positivity rate, and then what we saw here on our last third round of testing on Monday and Tuesday was roughly a 2% positivity rate, which was a great improvement. Hopefully the quarantine was effective in that. We did see approximately 800 of the 2,200 students did go home, or at least left the building and turned their keys in. So we could see that in our dining numbers, obviously, who was dining with us, word of mouth for the staff that was there. But yeah, I think all in all, the students thankfully made the best of it. Can't thank our staff for all that they did. Our custodial staff had to be pulled out of that building right away, and then was able to get tested, fit tested, and then we told them their schedule then was 3 a.m. instead of their normal 7:30 to 4:30 shift to get those buildings cleaned. As you can imagine, 2,200 students, or 1,000 and 1,200 in each respectively, that gets a lot of bathroom usage. Isolation and quarantine, the way that we're running that, if you haven't heard, so on our biweekly or really daily testing of about 600 students, 600 to 800 depending on the day, those that are positive get moved to residence halls we've set aside here on the lakeshore part of campus, and Jorns Humphrey, and 3 halls that are known as our Kranzage area. So we have space for up to 390 for students that are positive, and that's where they go for the duration of the time that they're directed to from the doctor that we're working with, who oversees this for us. All roommates of somebody positive go to a quarantine spot, and that has been in hotels that we have secured, 3 of them being on campus: Union South, Fluno, and Lowell, and then 3 additional hotels that we secured in the off-campus market here to give us upwards of 650 hotel rooms, and then the 390 isolation spaces, which we thought was going to be more than enough, and was certainly more than any counterpart out there at other institutions that have set aside for space. If you had seen early, one of the big reasons Chapel Hill closed down was they ran out of their space in the first 2 days. They had set aside only about 200 spaces. We had upwards of 1,100 here ready to go. So positive students to isolation, roommates definitely go to quarantine, and then others who are deemed close contacts of positive students. We are seeing, interestingly, about a 50% positivity rate for roommates who are tested within quarantine on day 4. So certainly close contact like that does lead to increased exposure and more than likely a positive outcome. Next week, we're switching to weekly testing for all residence hall students. So instead of every other, it will be weekly. We will now do roommates on the same day, knowing that there is that 50% chance that both are positive. So better for the student as well to go. If you're positive, you actually have a shorter stay in isolation. It's 10 days or 72 hours past your last symptom. Most are asymptomatic that have been going to our isolation halls. Staff doing a great job. We have had one full-time staff member in housing test positive, and not as a result of the workforce. That was determined, I mean, the workplace. So great to know there. Student staff, we are seeing some of them positive, but we employ 1,500 student staff. So again, not surprising given the nature of generally students' patterns of behavior, and they're getting it. So we're actually seeing a lower positivity rate in our student staff than the overall residential population of positive. One thing, if you've heard more for, the students you might be hearing from is we are allowing anyone to cancel at any time. We certainly want to make it easy for people if something changes, whether they classes shift online, their own comfort level of dictating perhaps that they would like a different environment to live in. So at any time they can cancel and receive a full refund other than what has been prorated for their amount of time stayed here. So certainly do not, I just got off a Big Ten call, and a couple institutions had 30 days into the semester and that was it. I'm not in agreement with what, with that. We want to make our students be able to make the best decision and not have to have it be held up on a monetary decision. Yeah, I could go on and on. I could start with questions and then come back and do more. Or,
yeah, Jeff,
yeah.
There's a few in the chat, and I think Emily Goodman's going to moderate the question and answer for us.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks again for being here with us today.
Yeah.
The first question from the chat is, when you mentioned 80% occupancy, is that 80% of normal capacity or an adjusted COVID-19 capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we started with 8,100 last year. 8,100 was actually 103% occupancy, with triples and quads based on the large freshman class that came in. We're generally around 7,900. We opened this year at 6,700. So the 80% occupancy level was based on, normal capacity of about 8,000 students. Does that answer that?
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
The next question is, could you share more about how campus anticipates approaching further res hall quarantines? Will there be any changes for spring semester, for example, in terms of housing capacity levels or testing protocols?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Number one change right now next week is the move to weekly testing. I think if we can get the labs that we're working with, what was huge, the veterinary diagnostic lab is now on board and able to do upwards of 1,000 tests a day for processing. Exact Sciences is who we were using, and their return rate was 2 to 3 days. The VDL has a 24-hour turnaround time, and all students on campus will now be, going through that lab. So that's going to help early identification for us as well to get students out. So big change there is the weekly testing. We are, in fact, right now, any minute, I should see in my inbox a letter to Whitty and Celery students in particular, just saying, given the nature and the density of those buildings, and I certainly don't want to put it back on the students that are there, but we do know historically there is a certain student that chooses to live in Whitty and Celery, and associated social behaviors that they like to partake in that has somewhat attributed to our higher numbers there, that encouraging them to have conversations with their families, and this is going to be the long haul here. I mean, this was a large spike. I think we'll still see some cases. I think we have the tools now with weekly testing to predict spikes before they might happen to that level. But we hope that we don't get to a quarantine again of another residence hall. Fortunately, I guess, for learning lessons, we had to do our largest and 2 of them at the same time. So we certainly learned a lot in all of that. I think that we have now better information to be able to dial in. Is it a whole residence halls, or is it floors in particular? So do we quarantine just a floor and not a residence hall at a time? So as the semester unfolds, I know right now there's a shift to online courses at Thanksgiving. We haven't made a decision, so that's one thing that's out there. If you continue to hear questions, to close the halls. If we're able to continue where we're at, students can certainly stay right through until the end of the semester, even if their course load is online, as it will be at Thanksgiving time. So we're not forcing anyone to leave. I think certainly de-densification, and you saw it in the Chancellor's communications yesterday, obviously with the way that students are congregating. It's hard even in our own personal lives. How often do you find yourself closer to someone and talking with them than that 6 feet? It's unnatural, and especially asking our students to constantly keep up with that is difficult for them as well. So monitoring, is what I could answer. Ideally, would we like to perhaps de-densify a little bit Celery and Whitty? I think that would help with potential future spikes. We have single rooms open, we have double rooms open in non-Celery and Whitty areas that we're encouraging people to, so roommates don't split up, they can go to another home. We are seeing students that, of those 800 that did go home, that are canceling and not choosing to return after this quarantine period. So I think wait and see, monitoring, encouraging, make plans if conducive. I think that the numbers are 30% of our students, I think, have complete online loads of our freshmen that are with us. So, but they also want to be here, and so balancing that all out.
Thanks for that information, Jeff. A few related follow-up questions. Could you share more information about students who do opt to cancel their housing contracts for this semester but would like to return in the spring? So advisors are particularly wondering about, will those students be able to get a contract for spring, and what would spring look like for those students in terms of their housing options?
Yeah, I mean, we've been sharing anyone that leaves now, although they will, move out, that, we would hope to have a space for them in the spring. I don't anticipate, unless, one of you on the call says that we're expecting 500 new admits for the spring, that we would not have enough space, given that, interestingly, international students, we typically house 500 to 600 of those students each year. Right now, we're at 117 of this morning. I don't anticipate that they will come back for spring semester. So I think we definitively have enough space. Whether it might be in the same spot that they left in, I don't think we can guarantee. I don't think we will get into a place where we want to go to full occupancy in Whitty and Celery, absent, what we're all hoping for, a vaccine and other things that are in place. But I think it's very comfortable to say that anybody desiring to return in spring, we will have a space for them. Yes.
One of the questions, and I think this is both a question and an offering of an idea, is with the res hall numbers down a bit and some of the students we're seeing in advising eager for a private space to be able to have advising appointments. Would it be possible to use available rooms for students who could use a private space for advising appointments or other meetings?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you. It's the first time, but we've gotten some, when Whitty and Celery was in quarantine, there were some open rooms, opening those up for some study spaces. So certainly I think we could definitely look at our inventory and designate spaces for use for advising appointments, counseling appointments, calling mom and dad in private just to have a conversation as well. For sure. Yeah. Thank you for that suggestion.
The next question from the chat is, have any infected students or staff been hospitalized?
No. That's that carefully scripted message when we went out with Celery and Whitty in the quarantine and sharing that 20% were positive at the rate we were seeing. They are generally asymptomatic, minor cold-like symptoms, and it's hard to say 20% is not serious and then say, but they're generally, that's how they're found through the surveillance testing. The only one that I'm aware of as a campus is the one that's been reported. It was not an on-campus student. And I think most of them have, through a phone call at the most to our health center, have been for consultation has been the severity of the symptoms.
Just a few more questions from the chat here. What kind of advice would you have for students in the res halls who are having trouble with the quality of the Wi-Fi strength in their rooms?
Yeah, let us know. I heard that in Celery and Whitty. We got a mom, probably you all have heard from her, that emails every inbox that we have, telling us about the Celery. We get on, it's important more than ever to have quality Wi-Fi. With all of the courses online, we spent quite a lot of money over the last few years upgrading our Wi-Fi system to what's called hospitality routers. So instead of the wireless access points we're all used to seeing in a hallway, each student is provided with an individual wireless router in their room, differently than what we all can go get at Best Buy for $60. These cost $350 in each student room and supposed to really provide outstanding coverage. So if you are aware of them, have them reach out immediately. We have our IT staff that dives deep into those, goes to the room, we'll do checks and figure out exactly what the problem is.
And Jeff, do you know the best way to let folks in housing know when advisors are hearing about Wi-Fi issues?
Yeah, I will pass along, I think it's our general inbox, housing info. I don't know it offhand. I'll get it and pass it along out to all of you, but just our general, or our contact form as well, our housing contact form that has a great tree branching based on the issue, whether it's dining or assignments, residence life specific. Yeah, that'd be the best place. Or just direct students to fill out a MARS request, our maintenance order request, and we will get it that way as well. That's one of the things our facility staff was phenomenal this year. You get all these hand sanitizers on the walls now, 200 to 300 of them. They put a QR code on the hand sanitizer machine that all a student has to do is snap it with their phone, and it takes them right to our work order system, so we can't constantly be checking 300 hand sanitizer machines, so need everybody to do their part just to say, hey, it's out, and our staff will head right there to fill it up.
Okay. I'm going to read this next question just word by word to make sure I get it right. Do you have an idea of how many students are choosing to cancel contracts with a full refund versus students who have breached contract and will not receive any kind of funds back?
Yeah, good question. So to date, since September 1st, we've had 560 cancel outright with us. So that's proration to the date they move out. As of today, 7 students have been removed for policy violations, and without refund on those.
Thanks. Do we know if any of the students who canceled and opted to stay home withdrew altogether from the university?
I think I saw a statistic last week. It was 11.
Okay.
Very low. I don't know if somebody else on the call who looks at that more, but we were looking closely with the registrar when we put on the Whitty and Celery quarantine to see who was enrolled and who was not. And I believe it was 11 as of last week. Yeah.
And an advisor commented in the chat that their students have expressed that they don't have a house fellow because the house fellow has either quit or is not present. Does ResLife have a plan to hire more house fellows? Yeah,
certainly yes, to fill every vacancy. We did allow house fellows during the quarantine period to return home too. It's got to be the toughest role right now of anyone out there, you know, to be on the floor, try to balance the normal community building that we expect and outreach and programming at the same time, balancing their own health, you know, and trying to do things virtually as best as you can. Many of these house fellows, when they signed up for the job, signed up for what we all think a house fellow should be, not COVID police as it's now, you know, become. Put your face covering on, hey, you're too far away. So really doing all we can. So yes, the goal is to fill every house fellow position, continue to monitor as we move forward here, the pandemic and the ability for them to have increased interaction with students. As I was speaking with my ASM group this morning, is that it's hard. In one breath, you know, we need students to self-advocate more for themselves than ever right now, and letting us know what you need, because we aren't there as we normally are, knocking on doors and being able to have you know, longer conversations face to face with students, and asking fellow students to look out for one another and say, hey, I'm worried about so-and-so down the hallway. Can you check up on them? But yes, we do not want any long-term absences of a position if one is vacant, and doing all we can to support those that are here as well. And that's what I've been saying to a lot of people. By a show of hands, would any of you like to come and do rounds for us of the residence halls right now, you know, and walk by a group of students and ask them to put that face covering on, you know, or use the common bathrooms with all of them, especially in Whitty and Celery. So trying to support our student staff as much as we can. You know, I think our Residence Life Director, Sarah, and her team has done a phenomenal job. You see other universities where RAs, house fellows, are threatening strikes. Michigan had one. They, you know, that trying to support them as the job they need to do, and them as a person and their own health and well-being too.
Thanks, Jeff. What can the advising community do to support your staff?
That's a great question. That one you should have given ahead of time. I could have come up with more. I think the continue with, you know, great suggestions you're hearing. That's a great one about the rooms and looking at doing that and what we can keep offline. You know, letting us know if you're worried about a student that's struggling. I know we already have that partnerships a lot in place, but I will be honest, it is it is harder, that traditional residence life experience and trying to do outreach with students the same is different. This whole experience is different. So where you might identify students that need a extra reach out by us, you know, we'll get a phone call from a parent worried about their student, and then we ask, can you give us the name? No, I don't want them to know I'm calling. You know, so how do we do anything about that? So yeah, no, we know that certainly we learned a lot from the Woody and Celery quarantine and how fast that went into place. 2 hours, was that enough time? I heard another school did 3, and that seemed to be the sweet spot, you know, so certainly if you heard of any lessons learned from there, you know, I shared with my group this morning, we can actually, and I have it on my other screen here, look to see how many students in the Celery and Woody quarantine dined at another place on this campus other than Gordon, which was the only place they're supposed to go to. You know, they went and ate at the Rathskeller when they were supposed to be, you know, quarantined. What should we do with that student? I asked. Not that I'm asking that of all of you, is just to, you know, continue to encourage the students to, you know, a majority of them want to be here and practice the good things that they need to. If they're struggling with the ability to, you know, keep up with the behavioral guidelines, this might not be the place for them this year as well, and encourage that too. You know, we just got an email from a parent angry about our visitor policy. You know, that's too restrictive. And we hope to, I guess that's the other, these are not housing policies. Like all of a sudden, every COVID related policy is a housing policy. You know, these are guided with our medical professionals here on campus, you know, telling us best practices. It's not a housing specific policy. So, you know, that there is, it's not housing deeming only 4 people should be in a room or no more than 10. This is the practice of the medical professionals on this campus and across this world to make a difference here. So yeah.
So Jeff, I think we're gonna call it at that. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Am I right about that, Emily?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sure that there is more, and Jeff, I really appreciate you coming today and talking with our group. If people have further feedback or questions, can they direct them to you? Should they direct them to housing?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
You're okay with that?
Yeah.
And so advisors and career services staff, I encourage you to reach out to housing with further questions or feedback. And we are here to support you. We know what a difficult place you're in, and a number of advisors, many actually made phone calls to Woody and Celery during the quarantine. And so I know it's been a team effort on that.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for all you do. I mean, it's different for all of you. I mean, as well, it's just, we don't get involved in this field to have virtual connections you know, making the best of it. And I know, you know, we're all hungering for that personal interaction with the students that we all want, because that's why we do this. So thank you for all that you do and support of us and each other and our students. Happy to come back anytime. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And you're welcome to check out or stay with us, whatever you choose. Thanks so much. Keep going.
All right.
All right, everybody. We are going to transition to our second topic. So I just need to pull up my notes here because I'm going to talk to you for a little bit here, which is not the usual way that I like to do things. But these large groups are hard to navigate a conversation. We wanted to do some breakout rooms today, but Zoom only allows breakout rooms for a maximum of 200 people, and we have more than that. So we are not going to be able to do breakout rooms, but we found some other ways for you to give us some feedback related to the spring semester. So settle in for a minute, because I am going to talk to you for a little while and share some thoughts and information. And I'm really speaking on behalf of myself and Scott Ovchadek, our registrar. We crafted these comments together, and they reflect sort of the leading the leadership that we are both undertaking at this time. So here's how I want to start. I really appreciated the feedback from last week's forum regarding communication and consultation, and your desire, rightly, to want to have more communication, more personal communication, and more consultation in decision-making of things that affect you and the campus. I think we're all feeling that way to a certain extent. So we are going to try something different today and bring you in earlier to talk about a really messy issue and help us wrestle with some of the problems. But as we're doing that, I want to remind you that we're all working, as you know, in an environment that's very, very different from what we're used to. The decision-making, the way decisions are being made on the campus is like nothing I've ever seen before. And many of you know I've worked here like 25 years. And so the decisions are being made much more quickly, much more centrally, and are of much higher stakes, leading to a lot more control around privacy and who gets to know and say what. So you can remember a pre-COVID environment where we all had a lot of time to have discussions about changes. It could take us a year or more to implement a change that we now have to make in a week. I remember when we changed SOAR from a one-day advising model to a two-day advising model. Those of you out there that were here in 2012, remember that? That took us like 3 years to get there. And if you remember how much we had to change SOAR in just a matter of weeks, whenever it was, summer, you know how different things are. So these days in my particular job, sometimes I'm involved in these decisions and sometimes I'm not. And when I'm involved, I'm largely asked to provide information or perspectives that will help decision makers. And many times, almost all the times, I am told, and others like Scott are told, that we can't say anything until the information comes out from the chancellor and the media. So this may explain why sometimes you felt that communication hasn't been timely, it hasn't been personal, or you haven't been involved to the degree that you used to be, because all that is totally true. That is the nature of the new environment. I'm going to push harder to be able to get more information sooner and get permission to share it, because I really understand how you are left flat-footed when students, parents, and you get the information all at the same time, and then you are expected immediately to be an expert on that information. That just can't happen. So I appreciated that feedback last week, and I'm pushing for some changes as a result of it. So there are some givens here that I just want to lay out for you. And I know you know all these things, but I feel like I want to lay them out. This situation that we find ourselves in, we can't fix. And I think we all want to fix it, right? We're all used to being able to solve problems. We can't get rid of the pandemic. We can't end the political strife that's happening in the country. We can work really hard, and we are, and we're trying to address systemic racism in our country, but we can't fix it overnight. And that's really hard on everyone. And at the same time, while we can't fix anything, the volume of work that we all have to do is astronomically higher for everyone at every level. You all are feeling that. I'm feeling that. I am sure the chancellor and the provost are feeling that too. And we've all been asked to do things that pre-COVID would have been inconceivable. It would have been inconceivable to switch the modality of every course in a week. It would have been inconceivable to ask you to start doing virtual advising in a week. These are things we never imagined we'd have to do. And the ability to maintain that constant state of surge and constant crisis reaction is exhausting. There's an article that we've circulated many times about your surge capacity is depleted. It's exactly how I feel. I'm sure it's how you feel. And that level of trying to keep that up causes lapses in judgment, and it causes inability to see clearly what needs to be done. And I think that's happening to everybody. But another given is that we have an amazing advising and career services team here. And that by team, I mean everybody. And we have a really strong community. And I'm really grateful that we took the time over the last decade to invest in this team and to invest in the relationships between advising career services and our critical campus partners like the registrar's office. I said to Scott one day early on in this whole thing, when he and I were like talking 12 hours a day, I said, what if we didn't get along, Scott? This would be so hard. And I feel like that sentiment taken out to a community level is also true. We are in the situation that we're in to be able to function because of the relationships we have that we've strengthened and made together. And we are all doing the best that we can. You're doing the best you can. I'm doing the best they can. Our leaders are doing the best that they can. And I'm choosing, as hard as it is to assume positive intentions, is that people want the best for the students. And they're in a situation, I am, you are, everybody is, where knowing exactly what to do is really challenging because there's so many different stakeholder opinions. I'm also choosing to believe that I don't always know everything about why a decision was made and what the pressures were on the person that made it. There are things that are out of my scope of control, out of my sphere of responsibility and influence, and I need to accept that. So I've been focusing on what I can control, and that's the lens with which I want to approach the conversation today about spring. So let me tell you what I think we can control. As I just said, we can control our relationships with each other. We can keep them strong. We can keep communication lines open. We can make the most of the information and opportunities when we get to influence. And so that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, let's really go after it. And the spring enrollment situation is one of these times. I think we can keep ourselves updated as best as we can. So this environment that we're in is almost like starting, well, it is. It's like starting an entirely new job. And the amount of reading and studying and learning that has to be done at the beginning of a new job is what has to be done now. I think almost everything Jeff Novak told us today is on their website somewhere. And so I've been trying to tell myself that I need to set aside time to read and learn new information, because having worked here for all the years that I have, I sort of felt like I knew everything. So there wasn't a lot of new things I had to learn. And that's different now. The other thing I think we can control, and this is a tough one, is taking the time to rest, use your vacation and sick leave, and use employee assistance to help when you're really struggling. And if you feel you're at the point where you have so much work to do that you can't take a vacation or use sick leave, then that's a conversation you have to have with your supervisor so that something can be adjusted. That's just not an acceptable outcome for any individual person. And so I encourage you to really think about how you are going to take the rest you need, use the benefits that the university offers in terms of paid leave, and use employee assistance, which is a wonderful resource for us to use. So let me tell you what we know about spring, which is what you've been waiting for. Talk about bearing the lead. All activity related to the spring schedule build and enrollment planning was paused or stopped as we as a campus worked through how we were going to handle spring 2020, which you may remember, summer 2020, and the fall semester, which we are now in. Even though we're in it, it's still constant work, keeping up with what's changing. And so spring 2020 had to be paused. There just wasn't capacity or attention to be able to think ahead in that way when there was so much going on. And this rapidly changing public health situation just does not allow for the kind of advanced planning we're used to. What would normally have taken a full year is now going to be done in 3.5 months for the spring plan. So it is reasonable to expect that enrollment will need to take place after finals. That's the lead that I buried. And I know that statement may come as a shock to some of you. It may be overwhelming and scary, and many of you may have seen the writing on the wall. I understand all of that. And part of our strategy today is involving you before the actual specifics are final so that we can anticipate likely scenarios and work with them. So given the reality that enrollment will likely be after finals, let's control what we can control. We have time now to plan for that reality and make the most of it. And frankly, I believe, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in now, that conducting enrollment after finals, while certainly not what we're used to and quite disruptive, gives us the best chance in these circumstances to get things right the first time and to not have to redo everything. I don't think anybody wants students, curricular representatives, or advisors to have to do things twice, like you all did and students did this past summer. We want to do it once and do it right. So this week we've been working with the Council on Academic Advising and Apple to gather feedback and try out some ideas around the enrollment schedule. So you should feel free to contact your CAA or your Apple member to discuss your thoughts. The memberships for those committees are updated on our website. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Diana, who's going to share some themes, or I'm going to turn it over to Diana, who's going to share some themes that came out of the conversation we had earlier this week, and then we'll move into the feedback part. So Diana, you're on.
All right, that's a tough act to follow, but I will do my best. So like Ren mentioned, we started to, what I'm liking to call wrestling with these ideas. And I know for many of you, this is the first time you're hearing this and the first time you're beginning to wrestle with this, but we started to engage those two groups to think of what would it mean to enroll after finals? What do we need to think about? What do we need to prepare for? So I'm just going to mention some of the main themes that came up. This is not at all exhaustive of the conversations, but wanted to give you a sense of what kind of things came up in those groups. One of the big things that came up, and I'm sure this is what you all are thinking, is we wanting to know the timeline or wanting to know what is happening as early as possible so that we can be prepared. That's why we're starting to talk about this now. So as much as we can know, as early as we can know it, so we can be prepared for whatever is coming is ideal. A lot of the conversation revolved around the acknowledgement that this is typically a quiet time for campus and a quiet time for many advisors. So there were conversations and concerns about morale, about workload, about a lot of advising happening at a time when many advisors are used to having time off, that it's often a slower time of year, a break for many people. And I know, as Ren was just speaking earlier about, needing to take vacation and take time off and recharge. And so that is definitely a concern with enrollment happening at this time. And there's also concern for students also used to being on break, traveling, going home this time of year. So those kind of things came up. There was some debate, some conversation about, do you encourage advising before enrollment? So encouraging students to come in and seek out advising before that enrollment period begins. The idea of, we don't have to squeeze all the advising in between finals and the start of the semester, that kind of attempt to flatten the curve of advising in the enrollment season. On the other side of that, there were some feelings of, is that going to lead to multiple student contacts, seeing them early, talking about things before enrollment, and then students coming back around and needing another appointment during the advising period? Is that going to create more work rather than alleviating it? So there was some conversation there. One thought that was a positive was many students would enroll after they knew their grades, and would that help with decision making for their classes? Another thing that came up was just the need to communicate soon to students if this is what the plan is, so that they know enrollment will be later than usual. And again, these are all things that the groups talked about. And then finally, like Ren just said, a strong desire to really want to only do this one time and not have to do a redo this summer, and not have to have a long period of uncertainty of, are these classes going to change? What's the mode going to be? So wanting to do this only one time. So those were the summary of the conversations that we started to have, and I'm going to turn it over to Ren so that we can now start to get some of your thoughts on this issue.
Thank you, Diana. So we did a lot of thinking about how we were going to get feedback on this, and there's no good way. Opening it up to a large group conversation doesn't allow us to really hear a lot of voices. We wanted to put you in small groups, but the Zoom functionality won't let that happen. So this is what we've arrived at. And it may feel a little bit like this meeting's going to end with a clunk, like we got all this out and then there's not any processing time. But that's what we came up with for today. I'll just leave it at that. So we are going to put in the chat a link to a 1-question survey. And the nature of the question is, if enrollment is in fact going to be after finals, what do we need to do to make that work? What do we need to do to make that work for students, for advisors, for anyone else you can think of? And I really encourage you to think about this carefully and spend some time on it so that you get your voice heard, because this is an opportunity to really influence an important process. I don't think at this point we can turn back time and get us to a point where we're able to do enrollment at the regular time. I think that ship has sailed. But how can we make it work later? And yes, I mean after finals. And I'm trying not to track the chat because it distracts me from my communication skills. So we're going to collect feedback through this form. You can also pose questions through the form, and then we will synthesize all of that and use it in the committees, Council on Academic Advising, APPLE, as well as the Academic Affairs Continuity Team, which is a COVID-specific team. We will use all that feedback to inform decisions and bring it back to you. So thanks, Teddy, that's funny. I'm trying not to look at the chat. Before we turn you loose with a clunk, I'm going to turn it back to Emily Dickman, who I believe has an announcement about next week's forum.
I do have an announcement, but just to clarify for folks who are wondering, finals are December 12th to the 18th. So thanks, Diana, for posting that. And Diana, can you say how often folks can fill out the form? And yep, as many times as you like, and how long you plan on having it open?
I don't plan on closing it anytime soon. We'll keep looking at it. So I think it'd be great to get some feedback by Monday. We're gonna have a conversation again at CAA on Monday. We're having an extra meeting, but we'll keep receiving them as long as responses come in. We'll keep looking at them.
And as I mentioned during my lengthy speech, thank you for listening. Doing a lengthy speech in this format is horrifying because you have no idea how people are receiving it. We have to make decisions a lot faster. So we would normally debate this for a year, and now we've got like a weekish. And so if you can put some time into the feedback now, it'll be really able to be considered. Okay, Emily, did you want to give your announcement about next week's forum?
I will, and one other thing I just want to note in the chat is if you have questions about, like there's a question here about would enrollment be before or after the holidays, if you could also put those in the document. If we don't have answers now, we can share those in a future format and other communication. Okay, so here's the announcement. Next week, Employee Assistance is coming to do a session with us during part of this forum about compassion fatigue and handling uncertainty and stress. It'll be an opportunity for those of you who haven't worked with Employee Assistance in the past to get a sense of what they offer and what they do. And we invite you all to join us for that. If that does not sound like something you want to do, we encourage you to cancel your reservation. By next week, we hope to figure out how to do some small group workshopping within this format. And so if you're not planning to attend, canceling your reservation or your registration will help us know how many folks we'll have for small groups. So thank you for that. And I think, unless Megan Grill, was there anything else I was supposed to share about that? We covered it. Thank you.
So we encourage you to put everything that you want to share in the form so that we can read it, and we will read it. And I encourage you to realize that this is still an open discussion, and we're not telling you not to tell anybody what you heard here today. Like, that's how we get into all these secrets where we can't say anything. But since nothing has been officially decided, we are inviting you into the messy part, which is the figuring it out. And that can be stressful and hard because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But we didn't know how to both get your advice and figure it all out at the same time. So we're just letting it be messy. And we will let you know when we're out of the messy part and into the decision part, which won't be long from now because obviously we're on a very tight timeline. So I'm going to leave it at that. Oh, is that Emily wanting to say something?
Yeah, Ren, I'm just noticing in the chat that people have asked about the forums continuing. We are talking about that, and it's good to know that people are finding them useful. And it sounds like there is some interest in having them continue. So we'll keep you posted.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jeff, for joining us. And fill out that form, folks. Bye.